This week, trade unionists from across Scotland are gathered at the Caird Hall in Dundee for the annual Congress of the STUC. According to its General Secretary, Ros Foyer, the role of unions has never been so vital in improving workers' pay and conditions. She spoke to STV's political editor, Colin Mackay.
Ros Foyer, last year at the STUC we were facing widespread public sector strikes. There doesn't seem to be the same level of industrial action right now in terms of the threats from the NHS, although they were avoided, the councils, the teachers last year. Are we kind of beyond strikes right now, or is this just a kind of calm before the storm?
Well, actually, workers have still continued to face the cost of living crisis. It's still having an impact, and for that reason, we've seen across Scotland over 450 cases of industrial action in the past year. Workers have had to come together. They're still having to fight to get the sort of pay rises that they deserve. But they've succeeded well. We've past 2 years, we've had collective bargaining deliver 4.4 billion, and 3 billion of that wouldn't have been delivered if it hadn't been for workers standing up and taking collective action.
Are Scottish workers getting better deals?
Well, I think Scottish workers are doing better in some areas, and we've been able to avoid strike action in some areas. What's regrettable is in far too many areas that money wasn't put on the table in the beginning. We would much have preferred to be able to have a negotiation that didn't involve having to take strike action. But when it's mattered, when workers haven't been getting what they deserved, unions have been highly relevant and necessary to them doing just that.
Do you think there will be more public sector strikes this year?
I think that if we don't start to fund our public services properly, we will see more and more workers taking action, either to ensure that their services can continue at a sustainable level and actually to protect those services, or to make sure their pay and conditions are a reasonable level.
So where would you expect to see the potential for industrial action arising in the public sector over the next year or so?
Well, I think there's potential right across the public sector, but in particular, I think there is a crisis of funding in local government, and many people rely on those services. They are on their knees.
We've had strikes in the last 2 years. Do you think there's going to be more coming?
I do, yes. If we don't resolve the problems in local government funding, I can't see how that can be avoided. We also have a huge issue of equal pay that we've really only seen the tip of the iceberg on, and we can already see, just last week I was on a picket line with workers across a number of local authorities taking action on equal pay.
But you think there's more disruption to come, particularly for council workers?
I think so. If we can't fund them properly, then I see it as inevitable.
Because you opposed the council tax freeze, but do you think people could have afforded a 10% increase in their council tax in the cost of living crisis, which was what was the alternative?
Well, what we would actually like to see, and we did propose it as part of a £3.7 billion package prior to the budget of tax reforms and additional income that could have been raised. We'd like to see an overhaul of the whole council tax system, and that starts with a proper
revaluation. But that's a long-term process. We've been talking about that. The Scottish Parliament's been talking about that since its inception, I think, pretty much, and nothing has really moved on that.
Yeah, and it's time for the politicians to get serious and actually make a taxation process for council tax that works. We've got to start somewhere. We can't start too soon. So I see it as a real failure of all the political parties that this hasn't happened, and we're still pressing for that. We need real change to our taxation system at local government level. Because
the changes to the income tax system were largely what the STUC was proposing over the course of the last year. Are you happy with that, or are you just a high tax organisation to the public now?
For a very small minority of people who are on very high wages, relatively speaking, in Scotland, we were successful in getting income tax raised. We're happy to see that happen, but half measures aren't good enough. We're seeing half measures on progressive taxation and funding for public services, and we're seeing half measures in other areas around workers' rights. So we need to make sure that we are pushing the pendulum in favour of workers in their communities.
So you don't think we're paying enough tax in Scotland yet?
No, I don't, but that doesn't mean that ordinary working people should be paying more tax.
Well, who else is going to pay it?
Well, we have vast wealth here in Scotland. It sits in property, it sits in assets, and there is no reason why the Scottish Parliament, under its current powers, can't start taxing that wealth. There is loads of wealth in our economy, it's just sitting in the wrong places. We've seen huge profiteering take place by our energy companies in other areas. We need to start making sure that those profits are redistributed.
Well, Anas Sarwar today at your Congress is talking about redistributing the wealth and the power to workers. Do you believe that a Labour government will deliver that?
Well, the Labour government have promised us they're going to deliver a new deal for workers in the first 100 days of that a Labour government coming in.
Peter Mandelson says they shouldn't be rushing it.
Well, he does, and thankfully Peter Mandelson is a sceptre of the past that I would hope the party won't be listening to. I think we're pretty reassured that we're going to see that promise delivered on. Angela Rayner came to our conference last year, promised us we would get a new deal for workers in the first 100 days. If we get that, it will revolutionise the rights of workers. They will be stronger than they've been in a generation, and workers really need that right now.
But you can trust them to deliver when they've already backtracked on things like the two-child benefit cap.
Well, I think it's up to us to make sure that they deliver on the promises.
You didn't manage to keep the pressure on them on that one because they've backtracked on that.
You know, governments and potential governments will backtrack on all sorts of things. There's no doubt that the business lobby will be working very hard to try and get them to backtrack on workers' rights. I think the onus is on the trade union movement to hold Labour's feet to the fire and make sure that they deliver.
Ros Foyer, thanks for joining us in Scotland Tonight.
Thank you.